the Supreme Court chamber grew completely silent as Justice Amy Coney Barrett, one of the most controversial justices on the bench, fixed her gaze on Representative Jasmine Crockett. For years, Barrett had navigated high-stakes cases with unyielding confidence and a commitment to her judicial philosophy. But today was different. Today, she planned to address a matter that had rocked the legal world for months: ethics scandals plaguing the court, including allegations of undisclosed gifts, conflicts of interest, and questions about impartiality that had dominated headlines throughout 2025. Congresswoman Crockett, Barrett began, her voice steady with the authority honed from her rapid rise to the nation's highest court. Your recent attacks on Supreme Court ethics are troubling. Your push for probes shows a serious misunderstanding of judicial independence and the separation of powers that underpins our democracy. The packed chamber was still, filled with tension that you could almost feel in the air. Legal experts, journalists, politicians, and everyday citizens had gathered for what was billed as an ethics hearing on judicial reform. Instead, they were witnessing something truly historic: a direct and unprecedented clash between a sitting Supreme Court justice and a bold, outspoken member of Congress. What followed left everyone in the room stunned and whispering in disbelief. In just a few carefully chosen sentences, backed by irrefutable evidence, Representative Crockett delivered a response so powerful and unexpected that it turned what seemed like a stern reprimand into a moment of admiration, reflection, and even loud, sustained applause from both sides of the aisle. This was far more than a simple courtroom exchange or a heated debate. It was about to become a powerful lesson in respect, humility, accountability, and the true meaning of public service in an era where trust in institutions is at an all-time low. If you want to see more powerful moments where wisdom meets humility, where timeless values guide our democracy, and where real accountability shines through, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. These are the stories that restore trust in American institutions, that show us how leaders can rise above division, and you won't want to miss a single one. To fully understand the depth and importance of this moment, we need to take a closer look at the two extraordinary women at the center of it all. One, a legendary figure in conservative jurisprudence, appointed amid controversy and now facing scrutiny herself. The other, a rising star in progressive politics, unafraid to challenge the status quo. Justice Amy Coney Barrett embodies the pinnacle of conservative legal thought in modern America. Appointed to the Supreme Court by President Donald Trump in 2020, following the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Barrett's confirmation was one of the most contentious in recent history, marked by partisan battles and questions about her views on key issues like abortion rights, healthcare, and ethics. Now 53 years old, she has spent her time on the bench issuing opinions in over 200 cases, admired by conservatives for her originalist approach, interpreting the Constitution as it was understood at the time it was written, and her careful, methodical decision-making. Born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and raised in a large Catholic family, Barrett graduated magna cum laude from Notre Dame Law School, where she later taught for 15 years. She clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia, whose influence is evident in her rulings, and served on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals before her elevation to the Supreme Court. Throughout her career, she's earned a reputation for her sharp intellect, her direct courtroom style, and her unwavering belief that judicial independence is essential to protecting American democracy from overreach. Recently, however, Barrett has found herself at the center of growing concerns about Supreme Court ethics. In 2025, investigations revealed potential conflicts involving undisclosed trips, gifts from wealthy donors, and questions about spousal business ties, issues that have plagued several justices and led to calls for reform. Barrett has defended the court's integrity, arguing that such probes threaten judicial autonomy, but critics say transparency is key to maintaining public trust. Meanwhile, Representative Jasmine Crockett was making waves as one of the most passionate and unapologetic new voices in Congress. A 43-year-old lawmaker from Texas, she brought with her a successful career as a civil rights lawyer, public defender, and state legislator before winning her seat in the House. Known for championing justice reform, fighting systemic inequality, and holding powerful institutions accountable, Crockett has built a reputation as a fearless advocate for the underserved, particularly communities of color affected by biased rulings. Her viral moments, like her sharp exchanges in committee hearings, have made her a progressive icon. However, some of her recent public remarks had caused significant controversy in legal circles. During congressional hearings and media appearances throughout 2025, Crockett criticized certain Supreme Court decisions as outdated and politically motivated, suggesting that some justices were blocking progress on issues like reproductive rights and ethics, reform rather than serving impartial justice. While these comments were wildly popular with her progressive supporters and echoed calls from groups like Demand Justice, many in the legal establishment, including bar associations and even some fellow Democrats, saw them as disrespectful, potentially inappropriate, and a challenge to judicial authority. The tension had been rising for weeks, fueled by a series of high-profile events. Legal scholars published op-eds in major outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, warning about the dangers of politicizing the judiciary and the importance of respecting judicial independence as a cornerstone of the Constitution. Bar associations issued public statements reminding lawmakers about the proper channels for discussing court rulings and the need to avoid rhetoric that could undermine public confidence. And Justice Barrett, known for her usual restraint in public commentary, debated internally whether she should address the issue directly, especially given the ongoing ethics probes that had put her and her colleagues under the microscope. The opportunity arrived during the annual Supreme Court Ethics Conference, a prestigious gathering where justices, lawyers, lawmakers, and ethicists meet to discuss key issues in the legal system, transparency, and reform. Crockett had been invited to speak about judicial accountability and criminal justice reform, an invitation that would soon lead to a dramatic and unforgettable moment that would be replayed across news networks for days. Have you ever seen a single conversation change someone's entire perspective, or even shift the national dialogue on an issue? Share your thoughts in the comments about why respectful dialogue between branches of government matters so much in today's divided world. We'd love to hear how moments like this have shaped your own views on authority, respect, and accountability in public service. The morning conference sessions proceeded normally, with discussions on case law and reform proposals, until Representative Crockett stepped to the podium. Her presentation was passionate, well-researched, and drew on her experience as a lawyer, focusing on sentencing disparities, poor prison conditions, the impact of biased rulings on marginalized communities, and the urgent need for deep systemic reform in both the courts and Congress. The audience listened attentively as Crockett outlined her legislative priorities, including bills to mandate ethics disclosures for justices and reforms to address conflicts of interest. But around 15 minutes into her speech, her tone shifted noticeably, and so did the energy in the room. Too many Supreme Court justices, she declared with conviction, are stuck in outdated ways of thinking that prioritize ideology over impartiality. Their interpretations of the law must evolve as society's understanding of justice, equality, and ethics grows. A low murmur spread through the chamber like a wave. Several attendees, including fellow lawyers and ethicists, shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the direct challenge to the bench. Crockett's voice grew more passionate as she continued, when justices issue rulings that uphold systemic inequality or ignore clear ethics violations, we must ask ourselves whether they're truly serving justice or just maintaining an outdated status quo that benefits the powerful. From her seat in the front row, Justice Barrett remained composed on the surface, but those who knew her well noticed the subtle tightening around her eyes, a quiet sign that her concern was deepening. The judiciary, Crockett pressed on, cannot hide behind claims of independence when its decisions consistently benefit the elite over the vulnerable, especially amid ongoing ethics scandals that erode public trust. Respect must sometimes be earned, not simply demanded because of a robe or a title. The atmosphere shifted dramatically at that point. What had started as a standard policy discussion was now becoming something far more confrontational, personal, and charged with political undertones. Legal experts exchanged glances across the room, sensing that something significant, perhaps explosive, was about to unfold. Justice Barrett slowly rose from her seat. Even in her 50s, she carried herself with the same dignity and authority that had defined her meteoric career from law professor to Supreme Court justice. As she walked toward the podium, the room fell into an absolute hush, broken only by the soft rustle of her robes. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, her voice steady and firm, yet measured with the poise of someone used to high-pressure arguments. I appreciate your passion for justice, reform, and accountability, but I must address the troubling implications in your remarks today. Crockett, caught slightly off guard by the direct intervention from such a high-profile justice, straightened at the podium, her expression a mix of surprise and resolve. Two powerful figures, one representing the legislative branch with its push for change, the other embodying the judiciary's role in interpreting the law, now stood face to face in a moment that would test the limits of institutional respect and the balance of power. Your recent public statements, Justice Barrett continued, including what you've said here today, reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of the judiciary's role in our constitutional system. When you suggest that justices should rule based on social outcomes or popular demands rather than legal precedent and the Constitution, you undermine the very foundation of judicial independence that protects our democracy. Her tone remained calm and professional, but the authority behind her words was unmistakable, carrying the weight of her experience on the bench. Furthermore, she added with precision, your suggestion that respect for judicial authority should be conditional, based solely on whether you agree with our decisions, sets a dangerous precedent. It threatens the separation of powers that our nation's founders considered essential to protecting individual liberties from majority rule or political pressure. Crockett remained silent for a moment, clearly absorbing the weight of the justice's words, her face showing a mix of reflection and determination. The room was pin-drop still, every eye fixed on the unfolding confrontation, phones discreetly recording what was sure to become viral footage. This was more than just a heated exchange between two strong-willed women. It was a defining moment that could shape how Crockett, and perhaps other lawmakers, would approach institutional relationships and ethics reform for the rest of her career and beyond. Justice Barrett, Crockett finally replied, her voice softer and more measured than before, showing a shift from confrontation to dialogue. I appreciate your willingness to address my concerns directly and openly. Could you help me understand where I may have overstepped in my advocacy? It was a simple question, but it marked a dramatic change in tone that caught everyone off guard. Rather than defending her stance aggressively or escalating the conflict with more criticism, Crockett chose humility and a genuine willingness to learn, qualities rarely seen in today's polarized political arena. The shift was immediately apparent to everyone watching, from the front row to the back of the chamber. Justice Barrett paused briefly, recognizing the significance of Crockett's response and the opportunity it presented for real understanding. Congresswoman, she said thoughtfully, your passion for justice and ethics reform is admirable and absolutely necessary in a system that's not perfect. But there's an important difference between advocating for change through proper legislative channels and suggesting that justices should abandon legal principles to achieve specific social goals or outcomes. The chamber remained silent as the two women engaged in what was becoming a deep, thoughtful conversation about justice, authority, ethics, and mutual respect between institutions, a rare sight in Washington. When you question the legitimacy of judicial decisions based solely on their outcomes rather than their legal reasoning, Justice Barrett continued, you contribute to a dangerous erosion of public trust in the courts. That loss of confidence ultimately harms the very communities you're trying to help, because the rule of law is their strongest defense against unchecked power. Whether from government or private interests, Crockett listened closely, her body language showing genuine interest rather than defensiveness, nodding slightly as Barrett spoke. Justice Barrett, Crockett said, I'm beginning to see that my frustration with certain rulings and ethics issues may have led me to speak in ways that weren't fully appropriate or constructive. How can someone in my position continue to push for reform, like mandatory ethics disclosures and conflict recusal rules, while still showing proper respect for judicial independence? What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom, including Justice Barrett herself. Instead of defending her earlier words stubbornly or falling back on partisan talking points, Representative Crockett made a decision that completely changed the tone of the encounter and elevated it to something profound. Justice Barrett, Crockett said, her voice filled with a sincerity that had been building throughout the exchange. A wave of gasps swept through the chamber like electricity. In an era when public figures almost never admit mistakes publicly, fearing it shows weakness, this act of humility was truly rare and refreshing. Several attorneys exchanged stunned looks, whispering to each other, and even court reporters paused mid-note, amazed by what they were witnessing. Over the past few months, Crockett continued, her voice growing steadier and more confident as she owned her words. My frustration with what I saw as unjust outcomes and ethics lapses led me to make statements that were both inappropriate and disrespectful toward the judiciary as an institution. I now understand that I allowed my passion for justice to cloud my grasp of constitutional principles and the proper relationship between our branches of government. Justice Barrett's expression softened slightly, though she remained composed and dignified, her years on the bench evident in her poise. The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the bailiffs, usually stoic and detached, leaned in to hear every word, captivated by the authenticity unfolding. As a former attorney myself, Crockett went on, her hands clasped in front of her in a sincere gesture of regret. I should have known better. I should have remembered that the strength of our legal system comes from its independence, not from justices making decisions based on public opinion, popular trends, or political pressure. My comments suggested otherwise, and for that I am deeply sorry. The change in tone was extraordinary and palpable. What had started as a tense confrontation had transformed into a meaningful exchange of understanding, institutional respect, and shared commitment to improvement. Many senior lawyers in attendance later said they were moved to tears by the authenticity and vulnerability of Crockett's words, seeing it as a beacon in a cynical time. Justice Barrett stepped closer to the podium, her black robes whispering softly in the stillness. Her demeanor shifted from stern authority to something almost like mentorship, though she retained the poise and seriousness expected of a Supreme Court justice. "Congresswoman Crockett," Justice Barrett said, her voice carrying both the weight of her experience and an unexpected warmth that humanized the moment. "Your willingness to reflect and reconsider shows exactly the kind of character our democratic institutions need right now. It takes real courage to admit mistakes publicly, especially for someone in your position with so much scrutiny." She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle over the room like a blanket. "But more importantly," she continued, "your passion for justice and ethics reform, when properly directed, is vital to ensuring our legal system evolves in the right way without compromising its core principles.